Good afternoon. My name's Alex Gartenfeld. I am the artistic director at the ICA Miami, and I'm so excited to be fresh off a really exciting run of openings last night for Claire Tabouret, who of course is with me, Agle Bassens, and Hudi Nilsson Jr. These three artists whose work are on our ground floor, as well as some of our collection, represent really important positions in contemporary art and work of the last 50 years, and are radically diverse in their approach to culture, aesthetics, and politics. And we couldn't be more proud to be, I believe, the presenter of the first US museum show for each. Is that correct in your case? Okay, good. She's the one that maybe wasn't. So that is part of our raison d'etre, is to give artists a platform at an important moment in their career. And in the case of Claire, an opportunity to do something really new and to introduce a body of work that really hasn't been seen before in this community, in this country, perhaps the world over. In collaboration with Amanda Morgan, who's our assistant curator and is my co-curator on this exhibition, we've organized an exhibition that spotlights two bodies of work by Claire, very specific body of work called Bois. It's all new work, and as you can see from downstairs, it's a tour de force in terms of culture, in terms of color, and in terms of form, and we're really proud to be hosts of this. I'd be remiss in not thanking Night Gallery as well as Almin Resch for supporting the exhibition, and thanking Claire for being such, a fabulous artist and collaborator in this project, and for creating such an extraordinary body of work. I'll add that ICA Miami is very proud to have an important work by Claire in our permanent collection. It is an untitled makeup work, so one of Claire's perhaps most recognizable images, and we can perhaps talk about that a little bit more later. It's from 2021 and showcases Claire's incredible economy with gesture and color and form. We're in good company. Claire's work is collected the world over: the Pompidou Center, the Hughes Museum, the Perez Art Museum, the Dallas Museum of Art. Claire has, over the last number of years, had incredible solo exhibitions the world over, including a beautiful exhibition that was a collateral event for the Venice Biennale, which we were lucky to see. Enough about me, and please join me in welcoming Claire Tabouret, and I'm so excited to be involved with you.
Thank you.
So Claire, I want to kick off just by acknowledging what a new body of work this is, the Fluff paintings. And I'm sure all of you had to walk through the exhibition to get here, so I know that you've seen it. They are acrylic paintings on faux fur, and I just want to begin with the observation that faux fur itself is a rather anomalous material, and I want to know a little bit about what drew you to that.
So in my studio, I always collected fabrics. So it could be old sheets of my beds, and when I started painting as an art student, I would use these sheets to stretch them on canvas and paint on them. So first it was more like a practical, maybe economic decision, like to keep everything that could be painted on. But then I also had kind of an obsessive collection thing going on, because I always thought this could be used one day, and I feel the fabrics kind of hold a memory. They're like sponges, and so in one of these boxes there was a faux fur, kind of dirty. I think I had found it at Goodwill at some point, and I kept it. And some of these fabrics I actually travel with, like they followed me from studio to studio. So I think this one I had for 10 years in a box from Paris to LA. And I was working, it was 2017, on a show which was about erotic and like pornographic images. I was interested at the time in this kind of triangular, how you build an image, thinking of the viewer and like curating it for like a third person, and struggling like how can this become a painting. And then I found this dirty piece of faux fur, and I thought, oh, that's a good start for like a pornographic image. It looked like a blanket that could have been left on an old sofa or something. And so I painted this very graphic image on it, and it worked really well. Like it had an impact, and but something like clicked in my mind. I thought that's really interesting, like how this material just captures light and can be nearly carved in. So then I did another attempt, but this time was way more conscious decision. I went to the fabric shop and I bought a faux fur that was brand new, no stains, no history, no dirty stuff. It was a pink fluff, and I wanted to, because what I thought it was for me something to do with the skin. Like when I painted this couple in having sex, it was as if I felt the goosebumps on their skin, and that was the faux fur was doing with the paint, like drying paint. And so then I thought of goosebumps, and I thought, oh, what about a swimmer that comes out of the water and is drying in the sun, and her skin is all like the salt. And so that was a new attempt on the faux fur, and little by little I got obsessed by this material, and I got more and more at the studio. And then should I keep going? Or do you
Please.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah.
No, go on, please.
So then there's lots of doors that opens when you start in this navigation. There's like the textural aspect that leads me to sculpture. Like we were talking about relief. It's a bit a step out of the painting and a closer step to the sculpture world. Like I'm in this in between. It's like carving wood, or like playing with clay, because the faux fur dries in a certain way with a brush stroke. There's a very playfulness to it. Like it's fun to do, but it's also not forgiving. It does look forgiving, but it's not, because you can't undo a gesture. So once the paint dries, it will stay like this. You can change the color, but you can't change the movement of the hair of the faux fur. So it means it's more about being in the moment, very focused, and things are happening. So it's a big contrast with how I used to paint with the makeup portrait you have in the collection, which is a more classic way of approaching a painting. This is on wood, painted with acrylic, where I can layer and layer and layer and kind of research the colors for so long. Like the faux fur is way more immediate in this aspect.
I want to stay on this idea of process, because you've touched on a lot of elements. Perhaps you could walk us through what your limitations are in working with this material, because there is this element of the paintings that is so sculptural. And it seems very clear that you can't go back. But what types of, say, corrections can you make once you've applied the acrylic? And also, I would imagine that all this sponge effect, all of it happens rather quickly.
Yeah, so the limitations are interesting to me, the constraints. Like I feel when I fell into painting and dedicated my life to painting, I was aware that I was restricting myself to a certain numbers of constraints that I joyfully chose. Basically a rectangle shape, certain numbers of color and brushes. And I think it's because of these constraints and these like limitations that you can really dive into a freedom, like be as free as you can. And so this is a new type of limitation. As I was saying, I can change the colors, I can change the shapes. I lost my mind, my thoughts, sorry.
Well, in terms, I want to just probe again your choice of material.
Yes, so one thing that's really exciting to me is that the fur has a color. You can see in the show, if you look on the side of the painting, you see the original color. They're all different on every painting. So if you go to the shop, it's like, for me, a candy store. You can really pick, but there's also, depending what day you go, there's different colors, but there's not a lot of choices. And I don't dye the colors myself. I don't have an influence on that. I just take what's available. And I do like this limitation too, because some colors are very unusual to me. Like I often use a background that's extremely bright. I often use neon orange or yellow or pinks, but some of these are painted on this kind of pale, purple, lilac kind of color. I don't think I would ever go in this color from making my own paintings, but so that's like a new challenge too, is like you have to use what's exists.
Although in your portrait and figurative work, you often use surprising, shocking, fluorescent colors as underpainting. And it would seem that this layering of at least two surfaces is a almost foundational part of the practice and a great link between the figurative work and this landscape work.
Yes, yeah, I don't ever start a work on a blank white canvas or white piece of paper. I always apply, as you say, often a layer of like this bright neon color. The same with my works on papers. I often pre-painted in a color before I print monoprint on them. And if I use fabrics, like I just finished a painting before I came here, I used curtains I had in my previous studio that are gray-green, so there already are, some even fabrics have motif or palm trees in them or something, there's always something to start with.
And you call them fluff paintings. Is that for the obvious reason that we can all imagine, or is there a more specific reference as well?
Yeah, it started that I thought that's how it was called. I didn't know there was another name, so yeah, they're fluffy.
And very touchable, though not encouraged.
Yeah, so it's fun because my daughter, she comes to the studio with me and every day, and she touches them before I start painting them. She's used to rub her head, her whole body against them. So now she thinks every painting is fluffy. She goes towards the painting and she's disappointed when it's like...
Now to shift slightly, when you took on the fluff paintings, as mentioned, you began with a sort of erotic figure, but quickly moved to landscape with a particular historical lens to it. And this exhibition cites Les Nabis, which is a post-Impressionist, so late 19th century group of French artists who were inspired by color, decoration, tapestry, and really trying to push past representation using that color. I'm assuming and taking for granted this was why you chose this particular historical group as a reference, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so my first landscape show was also on Fluff, was 2-3 years ago in Paris, and was all based from Giorgio Morandi's landscapes. And so I painted these at the time during the beginning of the pandemic, while all the museum closed down. So we didn't have an experience of going in the museum and really live relationship with art. So I came back to my first encounter with art was through books. And I realized that some works I knew from my teenager times through my art books so well that when I actually discovered the real version and when I went to Paris later in museums, I was nearly disappointed because I had a real relationship with the illustration in the book, and of course the colors are slightly different, the scale is different. And so for me there's two different types of relationships. The relationship of an image of a painting is also interesting to me. I know it's a difference, but I love them as much. I love them differently, they inspire me a lot. And so I came back to this love of books, art books. And Giorgio Morandi is well known for his still lifes of bottles, like very minimal, very repetitive. He's maybe less known for his landscapes, but he did quite a lot of landscapes, and most of them were painted from black and white representations of Cézanne's landscapes. So he would paint from books too. And it's incredible because when you look at his landscapes, he captures the very feeling of being in a landscape in a physical way, like the sensation of the warmth of the sun on your face, or like the smell of the dry grass, or like stuff like that. And I wondered maybe he's able to do that because he's not actually in the landscape. The removal is an important part of the creative process. And so for me, these landscapes are also removed from the actual place that is represented. And so this idea of removal, nearly putting a filter in between you and the image, works with the fluff. Like the fluff becomes a filter, becomes a layer of in between my vision of the landscape and the actual painting. And so it's adding like a few filters. As a filter of like the first is the representation of the original image in a book, the change of scales, and I would take a picture of this image, print it at the studio on a small postcard, changing again kind of the color, the quality, kind of as low quality as I can, like to simplify, remove myself. Then there's a lot of space for imagination, for projection. And then I would blow it out big again on the fluff painting. And then painting on fluff, I said once, it's a bit like for a dancer trying to do a choreography in like high snow or something. Like you used to move a certain way and all of a sudden you have this new like heavy material that's changing the way you evolve. So.
And the Bois d'Amour which is such an important title in the show, is an actual place.
Yeah, so the Bois d'Amour is an actual place. It's the Forest of Love, it's called. It's a place in France, in Pont-Aven, where a lot of painters have been inspired by, have been going there for a long time. I've never been, so it's perfect because I'm removed from the place. It becomes this dream place. And that's how I can work. And I like the name of it, of course. I like the artist it inspired. But then in this show, I'm very free with reference, like historical reference. I kind of take here and then do mix match. Like, so some of these paintings are inspired by Pierre Bonnard, but he lived in south of France and they're not directly painted at Bois d'Amour. Some other of Vuillard who did paint in Bois d'Amour, but also Bois de Boulogne. So I'm mixing lots of forests and just like everything is my Bois d'Amour.
And we were discussing with Davida last night that Les Nabis are prophets, and often the signal Nabi painting is called a talisman. There's this incredible spiritual and symbolic register, which would surprise me if that's central to your work or this body of work, but I wonder if there was a relevance to that very specific kind of theme.
Yes, so this painting, Le Talisman, is also called Bois d'Amour, like the second title, is very abstract. And we were talking about that, how this show that you see on here is, I think, my closest paintings, the closest to abstraction I've ever been. And I think I'm just opening this door, like I'm very excited by that. It's not a conscious decision of me waking up one day thinking, now I'm going to be an abstract painter. It's just like my hand is like guiding me and it's happening. So I'm super excited. And I feel one of the paintings, maybe the first one, when you come in on the right, which is painted on brown fluff, is maybe the one that has the most apparent fluff, the least brush strokes. Is really done in a choreographic way. It's about rhythm and music and kind of one gesture. And it's maybe the most abstract work I've done.
It's definitely the most abstract that I've seen. And was that sort of minimal application carries on to the monoprints as well, which are equally abstract, but also have a very personal dimension. And you referenced your daughter, who's in the garden enjoying our family programs, I believe, and her physical presence and impact on those works as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the development of those monoprints and also how they relate to the larger works?
So I started doing monoprints maybe 10 years ago, and I got completely obsessed by the technique, which is a very simple, playful technique often used with kids at school because it doesn't require any like sharp tools or any carving or anything. You basically paint on a sheet of plexiglass with a special ink, printing ink that doesn't dry, so you have time. You can wipe it off, you can scratch it, and then it dries when it contacts on the contact of paper. But you can reuse what we call the ghost. So once you print, you have some ink left on your plexiglass. it has moved a little bit because it already went through the press. It's slightly different. And so I can repaint a little bit, but use this ghost and go from there. So it's really the idea of improvisation, like nearly as a musical loop. Each monoprint leads to the next one, and I'm constantly reusing these ghosts. So a landscape with a cloud can become, the cloud can become a tree, and then can become a cow, can become a whatever. So it's usually one whole day at the studio would be a monoprint day. I don't go back and forth because monoprints are done with oil and the paintings are done with water-based. So I separate the two practice. But if I'm going to dive into a day of monoprints, usually I know how I start and I don't know where it's going to lead me. So I get a lot of my ideas while I kind of improvise in monoprints. And so I prepare my papers with a first color. Like I have stacks of papers, blue, pink, purple, etc. And for the first time I thought, oh well, let's see if, so my daughter, she can splash paint around, and she just like was walking with paint on her feet, on her hands. It's paint made with vegetables, so super safe. She can eat it, she can paint it. And with this first splotch, that's where that was the beginning of the monoprint. So you can see on the signature I put CT plus M, she's called Matea, because it's like collaboration, and really weaving, because the show is also, we didn't talk yet about that, but of course the fabric, the fluff, the rug, and this idea of weaving our two worlds and our two gestures together. You can't really tell, it's not obvious that a kid painted on these. It comes together pretty tightly, but I think for me it was also a metaphoric way of bringing together my life as a mother, as my house, even the decorative aspect of being in a home, the rugs, the furniture, with the art, and like everything comes together. And there's no separation, like how I live art and life, and family and life, and family and art, and everything comes together in the show. So that's also why it's called Bois d'amour, because it's a very romantic show.
Now the monoprints, there's one for each season. Is that also biographical, autobiographical, literary, commemorating your daughter's development as well, or is that about the connection between the images themselves?
Yeah, it came quite naturally with the colors. I felt there was a season aspect to them, and I like the idea that the show is taking place in this imaginary place, maybe over the course of 1 year. So it's a bit like a dream. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we love when we invite an artist from out of town, in this case Los Angeles, to do is to support local business. And this exhibition includes a collaboration, which is your first tapestry, with Obadashian, which is based here in Miami, other places too. There's a lot to unpack in that. The role of collaboration, the historical mode of the tapestry, but to start simply, how did you come to the form of tapestry? Of course, it's in keeping with this idea of weaving, but why now kind of work in this form, and specifically in the form of a unique carpet?
Mm-hmm. So one of the artists I was really obsessed about for the show is Vuillard, and the big triptych at the entrance is maybe the closest homage to an actual painting of Vuillard's. The other ones are more removed. And Vuillard is really known for his interior scenes with a lot of fabrics, carpets, and curtains, and wallpaper. And so I wanted to recreate this in the show, like entering in a room. If I could have rugs everywhere, I would have done it, to be in an immersive environment. And then I'm also interested in the idea of transcription, because I'm in a way transcripting my own vision of paintings. And then when I gave the image to the weavers, it's a painting made from a Bonnard painting, painted by me and handed over to weavers who are going to do an interpretation, a transcription of that. And my idea is not to get a copy of the painting. That's not really interesting to me. It's more, it has to be a good rug. A good rug is not a painting, it's a different thing. So to leave a lot of room and space for interpretation. And then it comes back to the studio, and then I discover it, and then it's exciting. And I thought, oh wow, what if I did a painting from this rug back to a painting, and then send it back again and do another rug, and I could do this my whole life and just see what we have at the end.
Did you share a photograph of the painting? What kind of level of detail? How did this kind of translation happen?
So this rug is made of wool and silk. So we shared an image of the painting, really high resolution, but also I picked which areas I wanted to be made with silk and which areas in wool. It catches the light differently. Of course, if you can touch it, you feel also the difference of textures. But then it was a pretty open, a free carte blanche kind of. Like I was super excited to see how it would be interpreted. Yeah.
And it sounds like this idea of collaboration, whether it's with your daughter or with another producer outside the studio, is becoming more important as a call and response in your practice.
Yes, and going back and forth between ancient techniques, artisan, like handing over something and see how it translates. I'm going to do some vases with Manufacture de Sèvres. It's close from Paris. It has a long history of ceramic. I'm working on chairs with Pierre Jovanovic, who's a designer. What else do I have? I have a few things that kind of stepping out of the rectangle canvas shape of the studio, and I've collaborated with fashion designers too. It's a challenge each time, but how can I find my way in these different forms?
And in diving really headfirst into this idea of the decorative, sort of with a capital D, does that come from, it sounds like from what you're saying, an idea of artistic freedom? Does it come from a historical interest, a philosophical approach to your practice, other artists you admire? What do you think is sort of the motivating idea for these sort of next steps?
It's a bit of all these. I'm extremely interested in Matisse or Picasso, how these guys approach so freely the back and forth between these, could do a painting in the morning and a picture in the afternoon, and that was fine. And it's something that in France was super accepted 100 years ago, and for some reason people got uptight about it and build a wall, you're either an artisan, you're either an artist. And I don't like the walls, so I'm also we should get free again and go back and forth, because you learn from both. And also I'm always interested of getting the art outside of the museums. I love museums, I love galleries, but it's also fun to see art in people's clothes and in the streets and people's houses in different ways. And so it's also a feeling of responsibility, I feel responsible for these things. I should take these over too and do them with as much ambition and quality that I try to do my shows.
And I want to also observe that place recurs a lot in this work and in some of your interests. I mean, you're based in Los Angeles for now the last 7 or 8 years, but from the south of France. A lot of this visual language engages the south of France pretty explicitly. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about either how that visual vocabulary kind of pervades this work, or just some of the references that you were growing up with, which I imagine inform your interest in Les Nabis and Vuillard.
Because it's really how I came to painting as a child. I loved painting as soon as I discovered the existence of painting, and then my first museum was in Montpellier, where I grew up, which is called the Musée Fabre, and has a big collection of 19th-century French landscape paintings. And so my first loves nearly are these paintings of landscapes, and you keep going back to your first encounter, I think, your first big artistic emotions.
It's interesting you found this French painting at the Norton-Simon Museum, which then became the reference.
So in Los Angeles, there's this beautiful museum in the Norton-Simon Museum of Vuillard, and that's the one that inspired the triptych downstairs. Yeah.
Now, You have a very busy studio. What else are you working on or working towards after you leave Miami tomorrow?
So I'm a bit scratching my head with this project right now, which is these chairs. I'm working with Pierre Jovanovic. It's a challenge really to do, because a rug is maybe closer to a painting surface, a chair is really not. So that's what I have to deal with when I go back. And then my next shows will be in France, in Château Lacoste, which is a beautiful place in the south of France, which has lots of different buildings built in this like wine regions. Every building is built by the different architects. So my building is built by Renzo Piano and has inside and outside. And so I've been working on fountains and bronze sculptures. So it will allow me to bring these things together, painting and sculptures.
And that will open when?
2024. And I will also have at the same time a show in the Palais du Facteur Cheval. So in France, it will be a French year, 2024. And that's a very interesting place because it was built by a postman on his bicycle in the 19th century. And he would bike around France bringing the mails and collecting little rocks. And on the course of his whole life, he built a castle that looks like a child's dream. And it's actually the most visited location in France. So way outside of just art world visitors. That's super exciting to me too. And how will I find a way to create something, I think, outside, outdoors, that can live with this amazing castle.
And the chairs you mentioned with Pierre Ivanovich, are those being done as uniques? And the challenge you mentioned, is that technical or interpretive?
I think it's finding the actual idea was really tricky. And then the challenge is for me, I'm not doing them myself because I'm working with artisan manufacturer who dyes the fabrics. So I have visions of colors. The only way is I have to paint them, but I can't explain my colors. Some people have a perfect vocabulary. Like I'm working with people who have, 200 names for different blues. I just know blue, but I'm like, not this blue, a bit more blue, but not as blue, but, So there's a problem here because also I'm not over there. So we're working through Zooms, which is a nightmare. And then to learn how to collaborate with other people being my hands, and I have to be the eyes. It's interesting, but it's difficult to me.
Well, congratulations on the next step of this collaboration. A round of applause, please, for Claire Tabouret. And again, we're so honored to have your work on view at ICA, and it will be so through the end of October. So please come back. We have time for, I believe, 3 questions. So please don't be shy, and I believe Malcolm will be helping us to coordinate.
Is the painting that became the rug downstairs, was that originally a Fluff painting as well?
Yeah.
I have a question regarding the crossover of into the design or decorative arts world, and as far as, because there's a lot of tradition of that happening in France and in this continent. There's a lot of things that are fairly new. For example, tapestry or textile work, and now it's kind of a big thing here in the U.S. and North America especially. Do you see the attitude, especially among artists of your generation, that are not French? For example, in the environment in LA, do you see a receptiveness towards that attitude? Because if you grow up in Europe, you grow up looking at the castles and the tapestries when they take you in school. But we don't grow up like that. They take us to.
Yeah, I think that's the paradox I find, is that in France we should be completely natural with that back and forth because we have this history. But I find French people are more uptight when it comes to, like, wait, is this art? Is it not art? Is it a blah, blah, blah? They want to have to put it in the box. As I do find artists in America are very free and very excited to go back and forth, and you don't need as much to justify, like, oh, I made I don't know, like 10 rugs and a collaboration with a big brand for sneakers, and I'm a painter and I have a show, very serious show. You know, that doesn't make people fall from the chair, but I think it would in some Paris fancy salon.
Enjoy your Sunday, everybody. Great to be
Thank
with
you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Alex.